Next, we'll talk about measures of central tendency, which is another way of saying we're going to have a numerical measure for where the center of our data set is. And the idea of that is a measure of central tendency, or a measure of where the center is, describes what you might think of as the typical data value in a set of observations. There are three types of measures of central tendency. And the first one you're probably already familiar with. That's the average, also called the mean. That's the thing where you add up all the data values and divide by the number of values. And you're probably familiar with getting your exam average if you have a few exam scores, where you add up your exam scores, divide by the number of exams, and that average is a number that gives you how you're doing overall in the class. It's your typical grade. To put this into a formula, if x1, x2, so on and so forth, up to x sub n are the n data values from a population, then the population mean, which we are going to symbolize with the Greek letter mu, it's pronounced mu. The formula for that would be x1 plus x2 plus so on and so forth. Finally, we add up x sub n and divide by the n data values. Now, if our data values are from a sample, the formula is basically the same, but notice that we're using a lowercase n for the number of data values. And we typically will use a small lowercase n for the data values from a sample. That's kind of easy to remember because there's a smaller number of data values in the sample. The population would have a larger number of data values, and so it makes sense to use a capital uppercase letter for that. Anyway, the idea is still the same. We're just going to add up the small n data values and divide by small n. Notice in this case, we are not using mu to symbolize the mean or the average. We use an x with a little line over it called a bar, and this is pronounced x bar. So I would read this: the sample mean x bar is x1 plus x2, so on and so forth, divided by n. Let's remind ourselves that a parameter is a number that describes the population, so mu is a parameter, whereas a statistic is a number that describes a sample, so x bar is a statistic. And you'll see as we go on that we typically use Greek letters for parameters and regular English letters for statistics. Maybe it's worth making a quick note of that just to help you remember this. Typical to use Greek letters for population, parameters, and English letters, perhaps with an extra symbol like that bar, for sample statistics. Oh, one more thing before we go on to the next type of measure of central tendency. There's a streamlined way of saying we're adding up all these x values, and that again involves a Greek letter. The Greek letter sigma stands for sum. Sigma is the Greek equivalent to our letter S, so S for sum. When you see a capital sigma, that's saying add up the things that follow. So add up the x values, divide by n. Similarly here, add up the x values, divide by lowercase n. So that's a streamlined version of those formulas. Okay, going on, number 2, the median is the value in the middle when the data is arranged in numerical order. There's no formula for that. I'll just show you how to figure that out in our examples. Last, the mode is the data value with the most occurrences. Now, there might not actually be a mode, or there might be more than one, and we'll see that in our examples.